Kristi Porter from Vector Global Logistics. Thanks so much for joining us for another exciting episode of Logistics with Purpose. And today I have the absolute pleasure of co-hosting with my team member, Elisa Rodriguez. Elisa, how are you?
Hello, Kristi. Everything is great. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. We are really happy to see this podcast. So thank you so much. And thank you, Simon, for joining us today.
Yes. So tell everybody who we have joining us and whose amazing story we get to share today.
So Simon, he's the founder and global CEO at SolarBuddy. So we are more than happy to have you here today, participate with us on this podcast. So Simon, how do you feel?
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me along. I'm looking forward to sharing some stories and talking about the work we do, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast and share that. So thanks for having me.
For sure. Absolutely. And we have so many questions to ask you. You're doing such incredible work, so we want to hear all about it. But before we get into some of the professional side, we want to ask you a little bit about your growing up and your background and how you became who you are. So Elisa, you want to kick us off with that?
Yeah, so welcome again. And Simon, first of all, please tell us a couple of experience you had while growing up. What was your childhood like?
What was my childhood like? I had a lovely, very, very precious childhood. I was very lucky. I was born into a beautiful family. I'm the youngest of 4 children. There's a few years between my elder siblings and I, so it was like I had 5 parents, to be perfectly honest with you. And they laugh at that. But I grew up in the southwest of England, a county called Somerset, which is very rural. It's a very rural part of England, very idyllic. Lots of old houses and old cottages with thatched roofs and beautiful farms and whatnot. So yeah, it was a very idyllic childhood. My father was an entrepreneur. He's retired now, but back then he was an entrepreneur. So that sort of entrepreneurship was put into my DNA, and many years later, here we are. But yeah, Southwest England. Went to university in London, and yeah, it was a very, very special childhood growing up.
It sounds like it. Sounds very picturesque. I'm picturing it in my mind as you're talking about it with the beautiful thatched roofs and everything. I already want to visit. So tell us a little bit more about those early years. What is there significant? You said entrepreneurship was something you learned about early on. Is there something specific that stands out to you, a story that now has shaped who you are?
I think yeah. I think there's a few actually, but I just remember. I remember the transition from my father being a non-businessman, i.e. working for somebody else, and then starting his own business, and that the shift that had on my family and my father particularly, and the hours that he worked and the pressure that he was under and the responsibility that he took on, not just having people working for him, but their whole families. And I remember that vividly as a young boy, 5, 6, 7 years of age, where my father would, he would work extremely hard to put a nice life for his own children and a nice roof over our heads, but also took it very seriously that he had a responsibility to do that for everybody that worked for him and worked with him. And that was probably the most lasting memory of that time. There was a lot of hard work, and I think that instilled in me a certain set of values and ethics in business that we as business leaders or founders or whatever have a responsibility beyond the bottom line, beyond our shareholders, but also most importantly for the people that are in our teams and their families. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson I learned growing up.
That's a big one. That's a good one.
Yeah. So if you could turn back time and talk to your old 21-year-old self, What personal or professional advice would you give him?
What personal and professional advice? Or
Yeah, that's
okay,
so deep, right?
that's a very good question as well. Professional advice. Well, I mentioned I went to university, and this is personally for me, and certainly not for everybody else. But I felt frustrated at university. I felt like I was like a greyhound in a cage, ready to go and take on the world. And 3 years of study was preventing that. And so I was building businesses and generating income whilst at university. And I think the business world is littered with university dropouts that have gone on and done amazing things. And I think looking back, I probably wouldn't have gone to university. So that's slightly professional and personal, I guess, because I had ideas and plans that I wanted to implement right there and right then, and learning about it in a classroom hasn't been anywhere near as valuable as learning about it in real life. And I've certainly learned business and whatnot through the school of life, and that's probably what I would tell my 21-year-old self, even though at 21 I was nearly finishing university. So that's probably what I tell my 18-year-old self. From a more personal level, maybe try not to do everything at once. Just slow down a little bit, and there's plenty of time, and there's a long life ahead of you, and stop and take things in every now and then, rather than be that greyhound and run as fast as you can and do as many things as you can. Just slow down a little bit and smell the roses, so to speak.
Yeah, well, moving fast and trying to do it all is practically the entrepreneur credo. So also makes sense from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, we definitely want to get into SolarBuddy, but you also had a journey from university until you started the organization 6 years ago. So what did that professional journey look like for you?
So I did a number of things. I had various little projects in various little businesses in the UK before I left the UK. And then I had the great fortune of a few circumstances in my life that shaped some of my thinking. And one of those was all the way back to being 16 years of age. It was late 1989, so I'm showing my age there. And the Berlin Wall came down and was coming down, and I took it upon myself to go and experience that firsthand as a 16-year-old boy, and that sort of that comprehension and awareness of two nations, but two people coming back together again after years of forced separation was something that really had a profound effect on me. And then I had, rolling forward a few years, I had the great fortune.
Okay, wait, let's pause there. You can't just bring up, I was at the Berlin Wall when it was coming down, and then 6 years later, let's talk. I mean, you were there as part of a moment in history. And of course, today, the day we're recording it, is the day of Queen Elizabeth's funeral, another moment in time as well. So what, for those of us who, like Elisa, was not born yet, and those of us who were watching it on TV as a little kid like me, what was it like to be there? What was that experience? Tell us more about that.
It was incredible. I mean, I was at school in the UK, and our history teacher rolled out the TV, the old black and white sort of big TV on the wheels, and we all sat there and started watching it on the news, and I just felt completely compelled. I was fascinated with the Cold War and the Iron Curtain in itself, and how a country, could be divided into four, and then a whole city divided into two, and one big huge wall just dividing families. That to me, as a very young boy, was very conflicting and confronting. So when history started happening on TV, I was like, I have to be there. I have to understand this. I have to comprehend it, and I have to immerse myself in it and try and understand what it must feel like. So yeah, I just basically bunked off school. I'm not advising anyone to do that, but bunked off school, which is an English term, so I skipped school, and and made my way from the UK to Munich in Germany, and then up to Berlin from there, and just joined the crowds and joined in on what was going on, and met some amazing people that I'm still friends with now, and
Wow.
and it was a moment in history, and I'm proud that you know I as a boy had the naivety, but also the bravery to go and do that and experience it. And what I experienced was families coming back together that had been separated, and people opening their eyes to two different worlds that were right next door to each other. And back then, East Berlin was literally like going back in time, 30, 40, 50 years. And if you were in East Berliner coming into West Berlin, it was like stepping forward in time 30 or 40, 50 years. And to see those expressions in the wonder and the bewilderment on people's faces was utterly profound. And I still remember meeting a girl from East Berlin, and I took her into a McDonald's for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And it was, something so simple and basic as that. And she'd never experienced anything like that. And that still sticks with me today. So a lot of that is the sort of foundations of some of my thinking and trying to build bridges between communities. And we'll get into that later. But, that's kind of set a foundation of some of my thinking and how the world should be. And there shouldn't be barriers and borders between people and families. There should be, and people generally, there should be unity and unification and kindness and a little bit more cohesion, I guess.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay, you can keep going, but I could talk about that all day. It's just utterly fascinating. I saw when I was in DC at the museum several years ago, they had a piece of the wall and all of that. And it was fascinating just to look back and be able to see it, but to actually be there, I can't even imagine. So it's incredible.
Yeah. I spent the following 3 summers in Germany, seeing the country come back together, and people, again, be reunited and whatnot. And as an Englishman, an English young man, a boy, basically, going into areas where they hadn't had any interaction with an English person for, since the end of the Second World War, building friendships with people that initially despised you, purely because of the country of birth. And then, a few months later, after spending time with a certain community, you're going to the house for dinner and stuff. That was, as a young man, that helped me formulate my thinking as well. So
yeah, certainly some lessons we could use today.
Absolutely.
So what happened after Germany?
So I finished university, and I always knew I wasn't destined to remain in the UK. I always knew I was destined to travel and experience the world and cultures and stuff. So I wandered around the world for a couple of years, went to some amazing places and met some amazing people, and learned a lot about the world generally, and cultures and whatnot, and the disparity of circumstances and in wealth based on location in the world and whatnot. And then I ended up here in Australia, which I'm talking to you from now, in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Met a girl and fell in love, and had 3 beautiful children, and built a business here after about 2 years after I arrived here in Australia. Started a business that was in the building industry. I was living in a very small surfing community in Queensland. I don't surf, my children do. That's my daughter behind me, who just arrived back from Los Angeles yesterday after a surf trip in California.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, living in a little surfing community. There wasn't a lot of business opportunities. There wasn't a lot of need for the degree that I had, and the global experience that I had. So sorry about that truck going by. So I started a building company and taught myself how to build houses and develop a building company and design houses and yeah, sort of fell into that really and did that for a few years until very sadly, very tragically, my marriage fell apart, and there was a lot of heartbreak in that, and so I, needed to find myself again and find a new direction that had a lot more purpose and back to my original values of the world and global citizenship, and here we are. So
yeah, I'm curious. Also, you talked about, again, I know there's so many gems in there and you are skimming past all these incredible things that I know we're not even catching a glimpse of, but you talked about traveling the world for 2 years and becoming a global citizen, what that meant to you. Are there a couple of things from and awesome places and awesome people? And it sounds like you're very good at picking great scenery. Are there a couple of things that stand out that, again, just really shaped you or stood with you, or that you saw examples of more building bridges that you wanted to kind of continue delving into that type of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been to 106 countries.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Which I'm very, very grateful for, to have the opportunity to do that. That's been over the last sort of 30 plus years, but I think different parts of the world, like in Africa, I saw a lot of things that I saw a lot of community love and care for each other, and things that there's no picket fences, there's no separation of houses, there's no there's no things like that was really interesting to me, and communal living was sort of, so to speak, in non-family members looking after other other people within their community, and I felt that was an ingrained sort of concept, and I felt that was really interesting as a young man. Ethiopia, I fell in love with Ethiopia when I was very young, and it's still close to my heart. And then in places like the Middle East, that back then were still nothing like they are now. Dubai didn't exist, and places like that so watching them grow and change over the years has been quite interesting. And then into India, and the different way of living there, and compared to Africa, that was again really quite interesting. And then all the way over to Asia, where so many different countries and so close proximity to each other, but all very different in their own beautiful way, and the different languages and different religions and food and way of doing things. And there was times in Cambodia back then that wasn't too long after Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge, and so there was a lot of pain and suffering in Cambodia back then, and that taught me other lessons. And then you go into Vietnam, and we're not a million miles after the Vietnam War, and the travesties of what went on there. And so there's a lot of things in there that not just the beauty of the world, but what humans were doing to it as well, and doing to each other, that I think helped me maybe see the world in a slightly different way, that we don't need to be mean to each other. We can try and be kind to each other,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, I look forward to reading your memoirs or your photo book when those come out one day. So keep me posted. And I'll stop interrupting you. You can go ahead.
Yeah. So again, well, talking about SolarBuddy again, it's mainly focused on fighting against energy poverty. So can you please define energy poverty, and what do you do to alleviate this issue?
Sure. I'd be delighted to. So for me, it all started for me with energy poverty on October the 11th, 2011. Very specific date there. But I read an article in Time magazine. I was going through the divorce that I mentioned, and I was in a fairly metaphorical dark place. I was, slightly heartbroken and not seeing my children every day, and that's very hard for the children. It was very hard for me, and obviously, very hard for my now ex-wife, but like it is for anybody in divorce and whatnot. But I'm quite an emotional cat and wear my heart on my sleeve, so I struggled with it, and this idea of living happily ever after had gone. So I was in a very dark place at the time, and I picked up this Time magazine in my parents' house, and just fell open to this article that highlighted the headline of the article was energy poverty, the world's worst form of poverty. And I was like, whoa, what is this? I traveled the world. I've been into so many different places, and basically I'd lived in energy poverty, but actually hadn't really comprehended it, So I dived into this article, and it just absolutely spoke to me. It was a moment in time where it was profound for me, and really, I've had the great fortune of meeting the author, the journalist of that article, and it just described energy poverty, how it affects so many people purely based on where they were born, and for no other reason. And I think we can all describe what water poverty is, or water insecurity is, in general, economic poverty and different things like that, and homelessness and everything. But energy poverty back then, and even still now, is still such a hard thing for people to comprehend. So, very, very highlight, 3 billion people cook their meals on firewood every day or every evening. A few years ago, 1.4 billion people, that's just now less than 1 billion people use kerosene lanterns or kerosene oil for lighting every day and every night. The fumes from those kerosene lanterns kills more children than AIDS and malaria combined every year from the fuel, from the smoke that they inhale. It keeps hundreds of millions of people in this perpetual cycle of poverty, because they're generally earning between $2 to $3 US dollars a day, and then they're spending about up to 40% of that on fuel to see and cook, which constantly creates this perpetual cycle of poverty. And I read this and I was like, wow, okay, I thought I knew a little bit, but I actually knew nothing. And the fact that there were so many people in literal darkness, and I was in a metaphorical darkness, but I still had electricity, I still had a house, I still had running water and food in my fridge, and a fridge that worked, and that really was a profound effect on me. And from that very day to now, I've devoted my life to tackling this issue that we all call energy poverty. So
it's incredible. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. That's incredible work, and I'm excited to hear more about you. Let's get a little further in. So you've given us kind of the broad strokes of your mission, but how does it happen? How does energy poverty get alleviated, and how does SolarBuddy in particular, how do you make that happen? And what are these yellow buckets we see all over your social media and website?
Yeah, so I read this article, and I studied a lot about the issue, and discovered a few facts and whatnot, and I ended up designing. I was always an inventor, tinkerer, innovator, whatever, curious mind, I guess. And so I was always, even as a young boy, just trying to come up with ideas and concepts that may take the world by storm, and back then it was about making money, but by this point it was about making impact. So I ended up inventing a solution for refugee humanitarian tents, a solar powered light system that I took to the UN, and it got picked up by those guys. And that was my first sort of foray into innovation in solar and energy poverty.
That's not bad for your first little foray. You just
Yeah.
wandered over
yeah,
to
yeah.
Japan and presented this to them. That's pretty incredible itself.
Yeah, yeah, that's literally what I did. I jumped on plane to Geneva and then knocked on the front door at UNHCR and said, "Hey, how you doing? I have something I want to show you." So, but there's a whole nother podcast in that probably.
Yes.
But but ultimately that entered me into this world of the humanitarian world, as we call it, in understanding the issues a lot more and discovering why so few people knew anything about energy poverty, because the vast majority of us don't live in it,
Right.
and the ones that do don't have the voice in the platform to explain what it's like.
Yeah.
So in that world, I really unearthed a greater knowledge of the and build a greater empathy of the people that actually suffer from it. And during those years between 2011 and 2015, I lived in Somalia, I lived in Ethiopia, I lived in Iraq, in Chad, and all these other places around the world that are in chronic, energy energy poverty, I guess. And I started. I prior to this, I'd written a series of children's books, and they'd done quite well, and they're about keeping children safe and stuff. So whenever I sort of go out and hang out in the communities, and my curious mind would want to learn and watch and listen and understand how people live and survive in such environments, I take a bunch of children's books with me and hand them out to the kids and stuff. And it was at those moments where we'd sit and talk and listen and read. And then as the sun set, the kerosene lanterns would come out, and just the toxic smoke from those lanterns, and the children were so oblivious to that, and they were trying to read and wanting to learn, but the smoke was so terribly toxic. I couldn't sit there for longer than a minute or so without coughing, my eyes watering, my nose running. Yet these children were just, it was nothing to them, and that was when I decided to move out of the safety sort of security element of working with the UN and set up my own charity and actually do something that had more of an impact directly for children that needed it. And that's where SolarBuddy comes from. And the idea, and that's still the foundations of our idea, was if we could develop an education program for children that don't live in energy poverty, children in America, predominantly children in Australia and elsewhere around the world, Europe, where they can learn not just about energy poverty, but about global citizenship, about the Sustainable Development Goals, about the environment, and about culture, and about how other people and children live in the world. And then part of that learning is I designed a little solar kit that once built by the children, that they'd learned about the issue. They made the kit and completed it so it would work. We could then donate those solar-like kits that are completed to children around the world that actually lived in energy poverty. And if we could do that, and we could do that by millions and millions and millions of units, then ultimately we're educating and creating awareness about the problem with the next generation, so they're empowered to feel like they can actually solve it, along with providing tools for children in energy poor countries to study, have a better education, so then they feel and are aware enough to be able to know that they can help solve it as well. And it all comes down to education and awareness. And I challenge anyone to read a book in the pitch black, because you can. And we all know knowledge comes from books, and maybe podcasts and a few other bits and bobs now. But that's the essence of the idea. And I mapped out on my dining room table in late 2015, and we went live in early 2016. And 6+ years later now, we operate in 52 countries. We've donated lights all across the world to millions of children, and all those lights are stacked in those little yellow buckets that you see. And there's 50 lights in each bucket. and then once those lights are handed out to the 50 children, those buckets are then converted to water filtration systems. So they sit in each classroom and purify the water for the children in the classroom. And that's what we do. And, you know, we do it well. I often joke that we are a logistics charity. You know, we have factories that supply our DC centers, and then those DC centers send buckets of lights across the world to classrooms, to corporate conference rooms, to you know, big events.
Yeah.
And then they get sent from there, once they've been quality controlled and checked, to the last mile, very remote communities all across the world, in Africa, the jungles of Papua New Guinea, and rural India, and the islands of the South Pacific. And, you know, when you look at it like that, we are basically a logistics charity, you know, and that's the hardest part of what we do. But it's around, you know, I call it bookend goodness, but ultimately we're educating hearts and minds, both, you know, with children and people, adults that don't live in energy poverty, and connecting them with the bridge of a light to children that do live in energy poverty.
Remarkable.
Yeah. So we already know that you recently expanded your operations into the US. So what are some of your future initiatives and projects, like a CSR or team building programs?
Just sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you just a little bit closer to the microphone?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now? Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. That we know that you already recently expanded your operations into the US. What are some of your future initiatives and projects? Like CS.
Tell us what's on the horizon.
What's on the horizon? Okay. Lots and lots and lots of things.
I have no doubt.
we have a little book coming out, a little children's book.
Wow.
So that's our first one of 18 that we're working on another 17 children's books to tell the story of amazing children in the world that help other children with some of the issues of the globe. So I'm really excited about that. I'm a big grown-up child, basically. So
and why write one book when you can write 18?
Exactly. Yeah, I did 12 in my first series, and so go a few more on this one. But yeah, so we're working on that. But there's, you know, we're constantly innovating. As much as we're an education charity or a logistics charity, we're also at our core an innovation charity. So we're constantly developing new products and new solutions to lift more people out of energy poverty. From StudentBuddy, which is now live, which is a more powerful solar system that will that operates as a room light, also as a torch, but also charges mobile phones. We provide them to predominantly young teenage girls, so they can feel safe walking around their village at night. They don't get taken out of school to go and charge mobile devices in other villages, so they can stay in school whilst those devices are charged at home with their new StudentBuddy, which protects them in very, you know, various ways. I'm working on a cook stove, a renewable energy powered cook stove, and a renewable energy powered refrigeration system. We do community lighting and sports lighting, so children can play sport after the sun sets in remote parts of the world where it's very hot during the day. So that's a, you know, product pipeline. I've developed a carbon trading platform which feeds into our community projects. We've created a corporate engagement program where people learn about Solve the 17. They learn about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in certain real life experiences and examples of that, and then they have to innovate solutions as part of their team building and day. And we've developed that, and that's going really well. And there's lots and lots and lots of other things we do, but
just a typical Tuesday for you. Yeah.
yeah. But I have unbelievably passionate, capable and inspiring team that works with SolarBuddy, and you know, we attract some amazing people to come and join our journey, and I'm very, very, very lucky and grateful for the hard work that they do, and the passion and that they bring to the table every day. So I'm very lucky in that sense.
Yeah, that's incredible. Thank you. I'm curious, you've mentioned, of course, a ton of things. It all came from, you know, one idea or one initiative and springing out of that. Of course, I'm sure there were a lot of challenges along the way. Would you mind sharing some lessons learned, you know, either mistakes that you made or something you just couldn't anticipate that you had to pivot for, perhaps like a pandemic? But just a few things you've learned along the way, especially as a tinkerer and inventor, a guy who sounds like he's always got, you know, juggling a bunch of ideas at once and trying to be, you know, bring a team and on board to this and expanding into multiple countries.
Yeah, it's I mean, nothing big and audacious is easy, and that's why they're big and audacious, and not everyone tries to do them, you know. You have to have a little bit of crazy, absolutely. You know, my personal life has definitely taken a backseat for the last 10 years, and probably will for the rest of my life. And that's because my personal life and my professional life is so intertwined, that I live and breathe what I do, and so lessons learned, that if you think you've got to the finish line, in fact you've just started, pretty much, you know. You have to constantly be ahead of the curve and always thinking into the future whilst working on the present. You know, I work in 5 years in advance in some of the things that we're doing, and then build the steps to get there. But I think the lessons I've learned from, you know, I've started many companies, and I currently run a bunch of social enterprises as well as charity. But the thing for me from a charity point of view is it's incredibly tough to, as a businessman, but also a CEO of a charity, I cross that divide between how to make money and how to raise donations. And there's a real interesting sort of dynamic for me that I've witnessed firsthand, of so many amazing business leaders and successful business people don't look at founders or people that run charities or work in charities with the same business respect, if that makes sense, as they do their peers within the business world. And that to be perfectly honest with you, annoys me. You know, I'm able to say that because I sit in both camps, and I've been successful in both camps. And the thing that I see all the time is, if I'm having a conversation with somebody that comes from the business world, and they don't know that I also own businesses and run businesses that are successful, then there's almost like, you know, you're doing good work, well done, but do you really know how to scale? Do you really know how to do this? Do you really know how to do that? And that to me is moderately patronizing to the industry, not to me, but to the industry. And there's this concept and notion that people that start charities are only doing it because they have such big hearts, and they wouldn't survive in the business world. And yet running and growing and developing and expanding a charity is 100 times harder than running and growing and developing and building a business. You have no equity to slice off. You have no you're constrained by far greater and far more powerful government bodies than a businesses, a private businesses. You have to justify and explain every single dollar that is donated to you, rightly so, completely fair.
Sure.
But to invest that dollar into hiring the best staff that can make that dollar $10, which means more people's lives are changed, then that's frowned upon. But if you make $10 million in your business and you hire the best staff around, then that's well done. That's congratulated, because then you're going to make more profit. Whereas the concept in charity is you have to do everything on a shoestring, but you have to do it. You have to do more and bigger, and the problems we're solving are far more complex and far more challenging than running a business that is selling widgets to a market that wants widgets. And that's the lesson I've learned, and I continue to learn that. And I've managed to work my way through that. And I'm not, this isn't a carte blanche sort of business is bad. And this is just a reality of the mindset is, even in the grant space, you apply for a grant as a charity, and they're amazing. The people that pay for the grants and donate the money and the philanthropists, they're phenomenally superb and beautiful human beings. But there's, it costs money to apply for a grant. It costs money to report on the grant. It costs money to manage the grant. It costs money to impact and implement the grant. But then the desire is to 100% of the funds that you receive go to exactly what, to go to the mission, and the notion of overheads and salaries and scale are just totally thrown out the window. And that's without a doubt the biggest lesson I've learned. I enjoy it now. It's 6 years in, it's like, bring it on. I sit with some amazing people, and it's like, look, we know what we're doing, and they're like, yeah, we know you know what you're doing. So that's been a nice outcome. But there's so many amazing charity leaders, charity managers, charity founders that are doing such great work on such short, low budgets, and they don't get credit for it, and they should. They really, really should. From a business perspective, they really should.
Yeah, agree. That could be a whole other topic one day.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about the idea of giving life to those who need it the most, I have been working in just one quotation from you. It was from Texas to Dominican Republic. So where do you currently ship, and how do you make the decision to focus on that specific areas? I understand that you have the product and you consolidate everything in Texas, but I am not sure if all your lights are there.
Mhm.
Okay.
There's such a big need. How do you decide where it goes? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if we could grow 10, 15 times tomorrow, then, hopefully we could sort that out. But ultimately, we, as a charity, and again, this goes back to some of the governance in government sort of requirements that we have to fulfill. We have to turn away a tremendous amount of local NGOs or small charities that are registered in certain countries around the world that don't have international or Western registration. So if they're and that's not because we don't want to work with them at all. Quite the opposite. It's because we can't work with them because our governance and our registrations won't allow us to work with small grassroots organizations that don't have they're not recognized within the United States or Australia or elsewhere, which is incredibly frustrating and heartbreaking to say no to people. But we are inundated every day from amazingly passionate and kind people that just want to help their own communities and their own countries. So that's our first filter, is, can we work with an organization that has amazing knowledge in understanding and cultural sensitivity awareness of what goes on in the countries that we want to work with and support. And if they do, are they registered in the appropriate jurisdictions that align with our governance requirements? And then we build a commitment with them through due diligence and hard work and agreements where we can supply them with what we have and want to supply them with. And then they have the tools and the skills and the capabilities and the support from us to distribute the systems as easily and as efficiently and as cost effectively as possible. And then their responsibility to us is to share the stories and share the impact and share the evaluation of the solutions that we've donated to them. So currently we donate to the Dominican Republic, primarily out of the United States. And that's because it's a close neighbor of yours in the US, and there's a neighborly way of thinking when it comes to circumstances like this. So, here in Australia, a lot of donations are requested to go to Papua New Guinea or the South Pacific because, we have a lot of connections with those countries, as we should. And so there's a lot of awareness that we need to do more, and that's where the pool comes from. But we donate lights to, Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania, India,
Wow.
Cambodia, all over the world. And that's a network that we've built up over the last 6 or so years, and it continues to grow. But it's extremely difficult, extremely hard to manage the logistics, extremely hard to justify the cost of the logistics to our donors. We've worked for 6 years trying to reduce our logistics costs. We've worked for 6 years to try and build partnerships with the big courier and freight companies because of what we do. And it is, without a doubt, been the hardest thing we've had to do within the charity. It's a tough call. And hopefully our relationship and our partnership can blossom to start solving that problem.
I'm curious, where was the first country you shipped to outside of Australia, and what country were you the most excited to get into?
So the very, very first test we did was out of a very, very prestigious, very expensive private school in Shanghai.
Wow.
To a very, very, very remote, impoverished school in Somalia. And we did that primarily, we did that for 2 reasons. One, our lights at the time were made in a factory just outside of Shanghai, but the Chinese culture isn't necessarily very charitable. And we felt that if we could prove the concept in a country, in an environment, and in a school that was so alienated from, the rest of the globe from that perspective, and then deliver lights to one of the most hardest, most remote, most underserved communities and places in the world. If we could do that, then we can build on, So we took that as the hardest challenge, and some amazing stories and impact came out of that. And that was late 15, I think, early 16. And then the very first proper media coverage story was out of a school here in South Brisbane, and we sent lights to Papua New Guinea, our closest neighbor. And that was all over the news here in Australia for a long time, and that generated a huge amount of momentum and awareness, and that sort of propelled us forward quite well. So that was the first one.
Wow, that is exciting to hear that stories. So Simon, please tell us how can our listeners connect with you, support SolarBuddy, or learn more about you?
So anyone can go onto our website. It's SolarBuddy, SolarBuddy.org, O-R-G. And there's everything you need to learn about what we do, why we do it, how we do it. On there, they can donate on there, which obviously would be very, very grateful for people to do that. And every donation results in a light being donated to a child. Somewhere in the world, you can select where you want that light to go. I have my own website, which is simondoble.com. I do speaking and whatnot. So if anyone wants to book me as a keynote, then I'm more than happy to turn up and have a chat about this on stage. But all my fees are donated to the charity. Yeah, follow us on Instagram, solar_buddy. We have a campaign coming out for Christmas to provide birthing lighting kits across Southern Africa. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of remote birthing suites in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere in the world, where children are born in the most extreme circumstances, where midwives are holding phones in their mouths to use the torch from the phones whilst they're performing operations to deliver children. I've been aware of this issue for many years, but this Christmas we're running a big campaign to send as many birthing lighting kits as we can to the places that need them, so children can be born in a safe environment. So
when does that kick off?
That kicks off mid-November, I believe.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for that. The more support for that, the more children will be born in a healthier environment. And then every mother that is born, every child that's born, the mother gets to take home a little solar light for their child as well. So just little things like that. But that's going to be a really nice Christmas campaign, and hopefully it's very successful.
Yeah.
But yeah, just go to our website, follow us on our Instagram and social media. Share this story, tell people about energy poverty and what one light can do for a child to get be able to do their homework, feel safe, and go to bed, turning that little light off is the last thing they do, feeling safe and secure, and just share that story,
Yeah. So one more thing before we let you go, which we could talk all day. I already can tell I have so many more questions. We'll have to do a follow-up at some point. But so what's one thing our listeners, obviously you're a nonprofit, so we would love people to go on and donate. Otherwise, what is the one big ask that you would ask of our listeners to be able to take action on your story? Is it something you need, something they can do? What's your big ask?
So many. No, I think we survive off donations, and the more donations we receive, the more impact we can have, and the more stories we can tell, and the more children's futures we can illuminate. But I think messages, stories, explanation, it's still such an unknown issue. That just sharing the knowledge, just sharing the story, sharing the facts that this actually exists, and there's organizations, not just us, but other organizations as well, that are determined to end this once and for all. So everybody's born into a safe, toxic-free environment, and not only is it helping people right now, but it's absolutely helping the climate. The more renewable energy solutions that are put out there helps the environment instantly. So just sharing the knowledge. The two things we exist for is awareness and impact. And if you can donate to create impact, then we will love you forever. But if you can share a story to create awareness, then we'll love you just as much. So that's all I can ask for.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. Elisa, thanks for joining me this round. But Simon, thank you so much for being here, for sharing the SolarBuddy story, and for everything you're doing to create impact and awareness around the world about energy poverty. So we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to keeping up the relationship with you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. It's been great chatting to you. So have a nice
Thank
day.
you, Simon. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for letting us know how do you being here, and you're like an example for everyone here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That's nice to hear. It's beautiful to hear.